Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing? Great to see you all again. I see we've got what is it, 400, 500 people watching, which is great. However, we only have 160 likes. Come on, what is that, guys? Do I have to do this every single time? You guys know what to do. You know the drill. Hit the like button. It helps fight the algorithm. It helps with the channel. In any case, I have a special guest for you once again. It's the one and only Scott Ritter. Scott is, of course, as you know, former Marine Corps, U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer. He was also a United Nations weapons inspector. Honestly, his expertise in such matters is really unparalleled, in my opinion. Scott, how are you doing? It's great to have you back on the program.
Well, I'm doing great. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's been a month since you were last on, and that was quite the hit. Honestly, that video went quite viral. I've seen it translated into I don't know how many languages, including Russian. I think it's got millions of views in total. I had people in Kazakhstan like hitting me up and saying like, "Hey, I saw your video. My mother saw that video," and I was like, "What? Really?" Yeah. So it went really viral. People really enjoyed it, and I wanted to bring you back on because when you and I were live, it was literally as the invasion, special operation, whatever people want to call it, was happening. And now it's been about a month since the Russians went into Ukraine. Given your expertise, I just wanted to get your take on what the situation looks like now. What are some of the predictions that you had that didn't pan out? What are some of the predictions you had that did pan out? We keep hearing from the Western press that Russia's losing. Is Russia losing, or is that wishful thinking? What do you think is happening?
Well, I mean, to be honest, we don't know. We're in the midst of an information war being waged by the United States, Ukraine, and others that has dominated the mainstream media. So we're held hostage to sort of a single river of data. The Russians don't seem to be interested in waging a counter narrative or providing a counter narrative. They seem more focused, rightfully so, if you're a Russian, on fighting the war on the ground in Ukraine rather than fighting the war in the in the war of public opinion. So right off the bat, outside observers like myself are we're prisoner to the data that we have, which requires therefore a lot of analysis, a lot of speculation, hopefully informed speculation, but speculation nonetheless. I think when we first talked, I'll be frank, I was expecting a much more violent, rapid offensive by the Russians, because doctrinally that's what they do. Doctrinally, the Russians bring overwhelming firepower, followed by a massed assault to literally grind their opposition into nothing and then break through and exploit the interior, et cetera, et cetera. And I was then, and I am now, of the opinion that the Ukrainian military simply can't stand up to that sort of assault. I don't know if we talked about this. Did we talk about what the Russians have come to call the Syrian approach when we talked?
No, we didn't talk about it.
All right, so I was left scratching my head watching the Russians going soft. Now I know that Vladimir Putin and the Russian leadership said we're not at war with the Ukrainian people, that we're not at war with even the Ukrainian army, that they sought to minimize the interaction. But nonetheless, from a military perspective, I've always been taught that you fight as you train. And the Russians have been training to fight using standard Russian military doctrine. And suddenly they come into Ukraine and they're doing something completely different. And I listened to an interview that a Russian general gave to a Russian media outlet. And he talked about what he said was the Syrian approach. Now, this might come off as odd for some people, because if you listen to the mainstream media, the Syrian approach is supposedly the hammered fist You blow Aleppo into nothing. You use
Yeah.
chemical weapons, et cetera, et cetera. But the Syrian approach from the Russian perspective was to negotiate a solution. If you recall, the way that the Syrian military won back its territory was to apply military pressure. But when for instance, the jihadists were surrounded, the Russians would come in and negotiate a withdrawal, and they'd bring in the buses, and the jihadists and their families would get on the buses, and off they go to Idlib, and everybody lived happily ever after. So the Syrian approach that the Russian general spoke of was that Russia would seek to negotiate their way through Ukrainian towns, villages, even cities, talking to the mayors and telling them to stand down, that Russia has no intention of occupying your territory, that Russia simply wants to implement its special military operation and denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. Now, denazification, of course, it's violent. So the Russians weren't going to give the Syrian approach to the Azov battalion or others. They were going to die violently or surrender and be brought to justice. Demilitarization from the Russian perspective was asking the Ukrainian military to stay in their barracks and allow Russia to dismantle what Russia viewed as a NATO proxy, which is what the Ukrainian military had become, a de facto NATO proxy. And then, as we have learned, again, this is reading between the lines, but that the Russian leadership is unhappy with some senior FSB generals who were responsible for preparing the battlefield, so to speak. These are the guys who, before the military came in, were tasked with going in and liaison with these civilian mayors and such, and getting assurances, even liaisoning with Ukrainian military and getting assurances that they would indeed stand down and let the Russians come through. And the Russian military came in very soft. They sent in lightly armed forces who did, probing, moving through areas, et cetera. And then they got ambushed. They got hammered. They got slaughtered. And even then, the Russians didn't come in hard. The Russians regrouped, and then the Russians carried out a very methodical advance on a very, measured pace. It's a pace, by the way, that's still more rapid than had occurred during the Second World War. If you study the major battles of the Second World War between Germany and the Soviet Union, the early days, 1941, the Blitzkrieg, and then later the battles of annihilation that were waged in maneuver between 1943 and 1944. The Russian army today, in many cases, was advancing at a pace greater than either of those. I mean, because the reality of modern war is it's dangerous, it's bloody, it's difficult, and we should never minimize the capability of the Ukrainian military. They're going to lose this war. There's just there's no debate about it. They cannot win. But that doesn't mean that they roll over and play dead. They're putting up one hell of a fight. One that I think many people, including myself, were surprised, and we shouldn't have been, because this is a military that had been trained since 2015 to fight to NATO standards.
Right.
And they had received very good equipment. They have highly motivated soldiers. They have great leadership. They have good communications. And they're defending on their home territory. True. So, all things said, there's a lot of advantages that go. They also are operating at an extreme numerical advantage. Normally, when you attack, you want to attack with a 3-to-1 advantage. So for every one defender, I need 3 attackers.
It's the other way around.
Russians are coming in backwards. They're coming in for every 3 defenders, there's 1 Russian.
Right.
And so how do you deal with this if you're Russia? And it became obvious early on how they were going to deal with it. First of all, you don't get bogged down in city fighting. Why? Because cities suck in forces. Take a look at the lesson of Stalingrad from the German perspective. So 1942, the Germans fight some early battles around Kiev and Izium, by the way,
Right.
and they fought off a Soviet counterattack, and then they launched this battle of maneuver where they're pushing the Soviets back, and they come to Stalingrad, and the smart move would have been to bypass Stalingrad, leave it alone, surround it, and keep going. But instead, they decided they were going to capture and seize it. They tried a coup d'etat. It didn't work. Then they had to grind their way through, and it literally sucked all the forces in. And if you study the German disposition by the end of 1942, you're seeing that the vast majority, the Sixth Army, is all in Stalingrad. You can't do that with 200,000 troops that the Russians had, because literally one fight for one city would take 200,000 troops, take all your troops. So, but you also have to shape the battle. How do you shape the battle so that you are the one bringing the initiative against 600,000 defenders? And you do this through maneuver warfare. And this is where the Russians have the advantage. I mean, let's talk. I mean, what am I talking about when I say maneuver warfare? If you go back and study Napoleonic warfare, I mean, if people want to read a book, I would recommend reading Jomini's The Art of War. It's about Napoleonic warfare. And you say, well, why is Napoleonic warfare relevant today? Because concepts come out. For instance, the concept of maneuver, not armored maneuver, but maneuver. You have a feint. So you're going to do a feint here to get the enemy to react. You're going to do a diversionary attack here to get the enemy to commit. You're going to do a fixing attack in the center to hold the enemy in place. You are going to outflank the enemy. I mean, these are Napoleonic concepts that exist to this day. You want to read another book, read Little Hart's The Strategy of the Indirect Attack. It's basically taking Jomini's Art of War up through World War II. And now we talk about tanks and airplanes. And we talk about, rather than doing the frontal assault, you do the indirect attack. You come where the enemy's not expecting you, forcing them to react to you, maximizing your military force. And the modern day application of this from the American perspective was the Gulf War, a Desert Storm,
Right.
the war that I was involved in. And you take a look at the concepts. We did an amphibious feint. We put 5th Marine Amphibious Brigade off the coast of Kuwait, and we fixed a dozen Iraqi divisions in place. They couldn't move because they were afraid that we're going to come in on a shore. We used 2 Marine divisions to launch a fixing attack along the Kuwaiti-Saudi border to hold the majority of the Iraqi army in place. We did a feint up the Wadi al-Batin by 1st Cavalry Division to hold the Republican Guard in place, freeze them, while the main effort did the big hook, outflanked them, rolled them up, and won the war. And we all sat there and went, wow, Americans are really clever. And we are. We know how to fight war. That's what we did. We study it. Well, you know who's also very clever? The Russians.